In the words of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, excellence and equality is not inevitable, and progress, like access to a high-quality education, is not evolutionary. It can only be gained and maintained through commitment, focus, dedication, and collective action. I'm Dr. Mike McFarland. Thank you for taking the time to view this documentary of the history of our organization, the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators. Please, as you listen, reflect on the words of the founders, the past presidents, and others who've had a significant impact on the establishment of the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators. Recognize that we are here today as the fruits of their labor, and we stand on their shoulders. And now it is our time and our responsibility to rise, to make sure that Tabse remains relevant, that Tabse continues to be impactful, that Tabse is sustainable, and that we are always excellent. Again, enjoy the documentary, and let's do the work together.
1985, I attended my first NAPSE conference in New York City and was very impressed with the goals, the ambitions, and the vision that NAPSE had for African American students around the country. When I returned home, I got with a group of educators here in the state of Texas, and we looked at those visions and decided that we wanted to see the same thing in the state of Texas. So our goals, our ambitions, our vision was that we would work in such a way that African American students would become more academically oriented, would become more successful in their pursuit of a professional career, would be able to enjoy the opportunities of visiting campuses around the country to take a look at what may be available for them as they finish high school and prepare for their professional career.
The time that we got involved with all of us, I'll be honest with you, we probably started getting involvement in '86 when John Raymond, who was superintendent of schools here in HISD, approached several people about going to Atlantic City to attend a conference. That was a black conference, that's all I heard. And I was approached by Ed Klein, I believe it was. But he, Ken Wells, Elwood Piper, we met Tom Brandon there, but Scott, Harvey Scott, who was E.O. Smith, principal. We went to Atlantic City and we attended this organization, and I think everybody was amazed. Here we were in Atlantic City, big city, and then 3,000, maybe 4,000 black folks talking about black education.
Several years ago, when Dr. Joan Raymond was superintendent of Houston ISD, she received a communication from the National Alliance of Black School Educators about a workshop that was taking place in Dallas. So my boss at that time was Mr. Ed Klein, called me and said, there's something new going on about black education at the group up in Dallas. And he said, Dr. Raymond said I could go and I could take one person with me. So I told him I'd like you to go. I told her. And she said, well, take Cam to Dallas with you. So we went. And we found out about the National Alliance of Black School Educators. We hadn't even known about down in this part of the country. We found that it had a great networking program, has potential for a lot more networking program if more people got involved. So from that point, we wanted to get the message out to black educators across the state of Texas.
When I had an opportunity to go to the NAPSE conference because my superintendent sent me and had no idea the quality of professionals and the total focus that was on making sure that kids of African descent had an opportunity to be successful. And so after that meeting, some of us got together and said, you know what, we need to be doing this in Texas. And so that was the intent. The intent was to mirror some of what NAPSE was doing, but really addressing the needs of kids that are in the state of Texas.
I guess if you're talking about wanting to accomplish all, we were trying to start an organization. And you can imagine all involved in that process. So it was more organizational, and be sure that you got a good organization started. And I think we did that.
You go in wanting to do so many things. You have all of the grandiose ideas about wanting to close educational gaps, wanting to see to it that educators have all of the tools that they need to be successful with minority children. And my thinking was that I needed to work hard to strengthen local affiliates, because I thought that if I could develop personal relationships with the presidents of the local affiliates, they would feel comfortable calling me if they had needs that needed to be met. So I didn't want to be just this figurehead who was at the helm of the organization. I wanted to be a real person to all of the affiliates, so I worked really, really hard to develop personal relationships with each of the local affiliates, because I wanted to work through them to make all my dreams come true for the minority children of the state of Texas.
I wanted to share with the nation the strength of our accountability system we had here in Texas, the success of our minority children, especially my African American children, that I was responsible for when I worked in Houston, and just begin a collaboration and a dialogue where we can learn from each other on the national level and use that information to go back and advocate in our states on behalf of our children.
Initially, my goal was to unify the organization and to help the organization realize the purpose for which it was created, to ensure that the mission of Tabse went forward from where we were to build.
So I think we did an excellent job of getting the Tabse Institute off the ground, and it is a document that is still here in existence that anytime can be put into implementation and practice. All we were missing was the funding piece. Although we did not get the $5 million from the Texas Education Agency, we had started applying for funding from different foundations. So that can still continue, and I can see that happening in the future of Tabse.
You know, it's just like even when I was superintendent, you're never going to get there. You set goals, you never get there because they need to continue, so you're continuously trying to get better, trying to improve. And I do think along the way, we've made some giant strides along that way of getting there. But one of the major things is get the word out there about NAPSE, Tabse, so people will know, be able to, as a professional organization, be able to give feedback to educators in regards to how they can improve their performance and data and so forth. And so I think we were able to move in that direction. Now, getting fully there, no. And I think that's something that we all need to always consistently and constantly be pursuing, that excellence of trying to improve the performance of African American students and professional educators to help them to help students to accomplish those goals.
There were four major areas that I wanted to accomplish. Number one, we already had strong affiliates throughout the state in Houston, Dallas, Austin, Killeen, just in several places. Wanted to strengthen the educational instructional activities of the organization to reach out in the community, to do teacher training, principal leadership training. So the awareness of increasing that professionalism in the marketplace was number one. The second thing is Tabse has been a very, very strong force, not just here in Texas, but in the national organization, which is the National Alliance of Black School Educators, which we refer to as NAPSE. And we have always had strong leadership roles and several presidents that come from Tabse. So Tabse has been a training ground for leaders. And leaders that were actually instrumental in expanding across the region and across the nation. So that was the second area to really focus and build on. Dr. J. Cummings was the the Tabse president prior to me, and we wanted to make sure that we had a seamless presidency between his term, my term, Dr. Carol Thomas, Dr. Mary Thomas, so that the agenda was consistent and it flowed at least for a good 8 to 10 years, so that we were on the same mission.
I think that when you look at what Tabse has done in the state of Texas, number one, it has pulled together those individuals that work directly with African American children. And even though that's the primary focus, it's really working with all children. And when I look at the work that has been done, the professional development that a lot of youngsters have had an opportunity to participate in, I know for a fact that I've had a number of my staff that have attended the conferences. They've come back and implemented some of the strategies that they learned there. So from that perspective, there's no doubt in my mind that the organization has basically just gotten better. And they haven't lost sight of the focus, which was to make sure that teachers had strategies, administrators had strategies for meeting the needs of African American children.
But we have now more involvement around the state of Texas. When we first started, we were basically Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston. Now we're all across the state of Texas, and that was one of the goals, was to get educators from across the state involved. So we have certainly done that. I think that we have been instrumental in producing principals who have been successful in the education of children. So I think we've reached some of our milestones. There's some things that we wish we had accomplished, but we probably have not accomplished at this point.
First goal was to get more people involved. The networking part of it, I think, has improved because we brought in more people from across the state. We had, the state was divided into regions. Well, the National Alliance was divided into regions. We were the Southwest region. As 7 states were included in that. And we went to visit some of these other state affiliates that had formed as part of the National and the Texas Alliance of Blacks Who Are Educated. One was Oklahoma. We visited them, and they were doing a workshop, and they had a lot of student involvement. And these kids were presenting the speakers at the workshops in Oklahoma City. And we said, this is a new strategy to get kids involved. Because, you know, it's always the adults that are giving the invocation, the adults that are giving the challenges and all. So the kids were involved.
Well, basically, an example of a goal that we considered critical at the time was we released a research paper. It was on the overrepresentation of the African American male in special education. And it was a resource guide designed to teach educators at that time. This was pre-504. And to teach parents how to advocate on behalf of their children before children ever get placed into special ed. We considered that to be a critical challenge because if you looked at the numbers back then, we were 3 to 1 above and beyond any other race in terms of special education. And we knew it was a national problem, but it was also a state and local problem that we had to learn about, and we provided that resource to educators throughout the country.
We developed internally as a functional organization, meaning that we had regular communications, regular board meetings, well-planned conferences annually. Also, we were able to increase the number of affiliates across the state, to increase the participation of the affiliates in NAPSE, and through the successful conferences that we sponsored, we were able to create a strong financial base for the organization.
And then the other areas, we wanted to really become more involved in the community, and so we applied for 21st Century Community Learning Center program grants that would collaborate with individual school districts, and we would partner, and we would actually reinforce these strategies, include fine arts in it, and we would have our Tabse members throughout the state to participate. So those are the 4 areas that I wanted to concentrate on, which is carryover and a legacy to take us to the next level.
One of the major struggles in establishing Tabse was to make people believe that we were real, that we really were serious about what we were trying to do in an effort to help particularly our African American children, but to help all students. People didn't believe it, and even a lot of our African American educators didn't believe it at the beginning, and it's taken some time for them to be convinced that this organization does mean to do what it has set out to do.
The gentleman who started NAPSE was Dr. Charles Moody, and he did it for all of the African American superintendents at that time. We're going way back 30 years. We're not talking about a lot of people, but he thought that they should get together and talk about things that affected them individually and as a group. And it grew into the National Alliance of Black School Education. Now, he and I happened to have gone to the same undergraduate school, Central State University in Ohio. He would always question me at homecoming as to why we weren't doing something in Texas. And I finally, decided that I would take up that challenge and come back and start to work with, first I started to work with the establishment of the Dallas Regional Alliance. And then we got together with some of the other people in the state, Houston, Austin, and we decided that we could do a much better job if we were together under the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators statewide. There were a lot of people, African American people, who had trouble at that time. You're talking about maybe 25, 26, 27 years ago. They had trouble joining an organization that had the term black in it, Black School Educators. And so we had to kind of work with them to let them understand the reason why it was that organization, that we were affiliated with a national group, that we wanted a state group that would pay particular attention to what was happening with African American students. Now, we did not rule out other people joining us, but they had to have an agenda that allowed them to work on the problems of bringing about educational achievement for African American students. So we were open always to whites, Hispanics, Asians, anybody who had that as an agenda item could join our organization.
Also, we were able to develop an external image with other entities around the state that portrayed Tabse as a strong advocation for the children and their educators across Texas.
Initially, a lot of it had to do with that anytime that you're starting an organization that focused on one particular group, you had some folks who kind of looked at the organization from a not negative perspective, but you didn't have the same amount of support and respect. And that's one of the things that I really felt like happened over the years in working with the commissioner and in working with other leadership, that now a lot of those folks turn to Tabse to try to make sure that when they're crafting policies, that those policies include meeting the needs of African American children.
As we were trying to implement this Tabse Research Institute, we met with several legislators, and so at one of our kickoff events at one of our state conferences, we were in Austin, and Senator Royce West was the keynote speaker. And he challenged us. He says, Tabse, you are the voice, but we don't hear you before the legislators in Texas. We need you to come. We need you to come to testify. We need you to be at hearings. We need you to volunteer on various committees. And I mean, he really stepped on our toes to let us know that we have to go a step further and not just be involved in the education, but we have to integrate the politics to make things happen if we wanted to get the funding to have the kind of institute that we wanted to have.
I think one of the major struggles of any national organization, is to look at the difference between local interests and national interests. They're very different in how they move forward and how they're challenged. One example of that was the rollout of No Child Left Behind. We were able to get a grant from the Department of Education through the National Alliance of Black School Educators. It allowed us to bring everybody in the country up to speed that was of African American descent in a leadership role. We held many conferences around the country to help people understand what the challenges were, but also what some of the solutions were that we had experienced here in Texas, because that's where it came from. getting grants and going after solutions for African American children is what a national organization has to be about. You don't have the staffing. People think national offices are very big. They really aren't. Usually in an organization like NAPSE, you rely on its membership. You rely on the experts out there in the field to primarily guide the majority of the work, do the research studies, do the publications, because your national office is basically just a placeholder in Washington, D.C. that facilitates the interests of the president and of the membership.
A major struggle was carving out the time to really be there when presidents would call. Because once they get to know you and they feel comfortable, they do call. But it isn't like being president in Houston, where you just jump in your car and go there. But if they call you from Killeen and say, I need you to be here because we're doing whatever, then you've got to take the time to do that. So I found that it really got to be difficult to try to be everything to everybody.
I guess the major struggle was getting people to have confidence in what the program was about. They hadn't been to any of the National Alliance of Black School Educators. We did go get a group that went to Washington, D.C. as part of the National Alliance of Black School Educators Conference. We put pretty good sized group, and they got involved in what was going on. They got involved in the workshops, got involved with the speakers, got involved with the other teachers and strategists and educators that were part of that. And they came back with a renewed challenge to make this program go. One of my elementary students, when I taught 6th grade at Crawford Elementary, has moved up the ladder. She's now has her doctorate degree in education. And she's a student that I taught in the 6th grade. That's Dr. Elaine Bailey.
Oh, there are so many successes, but the successes are not mine. Had a wonderful team who felt the same way I felt. So they made a lot of good things happen, and I got the credit for it. But it was really more of a team effort. And I think the thing that I feel best about is, well, really there are two. One is seeing student affiliates actively engaged. I think if we can get people involved while they're still students, that love comes, and we've got young people who we are helping to mold their ideals, and we stand a good chance of keeping the organization alive and viable. Another thing I feel good about is the fact that we have an incoming president who's following up and following through on keeping superintendents involved. Because the truth of the matter is, no matter how much teachers and other educators in a school district want to be a part of Tabse, if their superintendent does not buy in, their lives can be very, very miserable.
Some of the conferences that we have had, we've had some great speakers who have come in to the conference. One of the first ones that I really will never forget was the year we had Joe Clark and George McKenna as our speaker for our state conference. Joe Clark and George McKenna are both national educators and had never appeared on the same stage before because of their differences of opinion on how to educate children. But that year, in 1996, they came to Fort Worth. They attended our state conference, and both of them presented their ideas and their logic about educating children. That was one of the high points for me for this organization.
I think that the one that I think of right off the bat was when we had a conference down in Galveston. Very well attended. Speakers were outstanding. I can remember people walking out and saying, wow, this was well worth my time spent. That, as well as there were some position papers that were done over the years that that information was shared with legislators, and I think that too was something that a lot of people will always remember, that they were a part of helping to craft some of that legislation.
One thing we were able to do when I was president of NAPSE was that we were able to take superintendents on an educational leadership experience throughout the world. We went to Glasgow, Scotland, which was very different from the United States. It has a very small minority population. Their black population is primarily from Africa, but they have the same challenges we had in their schools with student achievement, performance, discipline, the same kinds of issues, but their population is Scottish. At the same time, when we went to South Africa, we went to South Africa 2 years in a row. What was significant about that was, naturally as educators, we visited schools. We wanted to see education happening every day, and we did. We got to see that. What was shocking, they took us to one school. We had these 2 buses full of superintendents that pulled up these large buses in a field. It was a field. We got out the buses. There were hundreds of children that came from the shanty town, the tin huts where people lived right there surrounding this field where they came for their educational experience every day. The teachers showed up, the children showed up, and they said the only times they had problems were rainy days or the day after a rainy day. Well, what was significant about that was that we had a chance to meet with their equivalent of the Secretary of Education for South Africa. And he asked about our experience and what we saw. And I basically asked him a question. How could you have 39.5 million Africans in South Africa and only 3.5 million whites, and you can't afford to have a school for children with the wealth that this nation has? And he looked at his staff like, well, what is this guy talking about? And I said, well, we visited a school without walls. And he really didn't understand the concept. And I basically explained it to him. But what was successful about that was he listened. And he said, well, this happens all the time. They spring up and we have to do things. I said, but in the U.S., when our populations move around and spring up like that, we put portable classrooms on campuses to accommodate those children so that they can still have a school experience. The next year when we went back to South Africa, do you know they had placed 35 portable classrooms in that field? Those children were having school in those buildings, even though the electricity hadn't been hooked up.
One of the important things was that we were able to recognize the 2 black elected officials who were serving on the State Board of Education at that time, Dr. Rosie Sorrells of Dallas and Dr. Alma Allen of Houston. We established working relationships with the Commissioner of Higher Education as well as the Commissioner of Education and their staffs. We collaborated with the elected members of the House of Representatives and the State Senate. State Senator Royce West actually was a keynote speaker at one of our conferences, and we spent time lobbying at the State House for our children and their interests. We added new affiliates across Texas, which was very important as we carried the word of our responsibility to our children across the state of Texas.
We added technology. We actually went into, that was the first year during my presidency that we started having our own website as a Tabse organization, as a HAPSE organization. We did a lot of collaboration. We had a lot of associates who were active in their own affiliates that actually brought a lot of leadership to the table. So the Tabse conferences, I think, were top notch.
You know, one of the major things I wanted to do with NAPSE is have superintendents involved. I think superintendents have to come back and set the tone for the organization as leaders. And so we started a superintendents summit that would help us to get superintendents to go back and work in their particular school system, school districts, to get younger educators involved and so forth. And we started off, the first time we had the summit, we started off with probably about 32 superintendents attending. And the last time we had it, it was something up to almost 100 superintendents attending. And this next year, I'm sure more superintendents will attend. So I think that's a flagship of things that we wanted to accomplish. Another one was to get us to work closer with the Hispanic superintendents. And so we started a coalition with NAPSE and ALAS. That's the Association of Latino administrators and supervisors. And we were able to work closely with them, initially getting started to make some things happen along the way. So those are two things, along with some other things that we were able to do that I'm proud that there were initiatives that got started.
We had strong leadership. Almost every leader in Texas that wanted an administrative position throughout the school districts in the Houston area and throughout the state, if they actively participated and took on leadership roles with their affiliates, their local affiliates, and Tabse, they received those positions.
I've always been into technology. Under my leadership, we began the online registration process for the national organization. We never had that prior to me being president. And I thought that was significant because while I was implementing technology in the public school system in America, at the same time I took that experience to the national level. But the rollout of that was online registration, and you would have been surprised of the number of educators. I'm talking about superintendents, board members, assistant superintendents, university members who were not into the technology. So it was a struggle to get people to use, which we all take for granted today, an online registration process for our national conferences and membership.
Always a high when someone calls and said, our test scores have gone up. We were at a particular workshop or we had somebody come in and we tried what they suggested and we're seeing results. It was wonderful to go to programs for students at risk and to hear students come forward and say what that affiliate had done to help make things better. Just a constant high.
Oh gosh, there's always going to be the highs and lows of the organization, but they outweighs, and yeah, there are some low points. I think probably I would like for us to have probably be better known than what we are in the community, but I'm glad to start this initiative, even now that I see most college chapters are popping up, young people getting involved with NAPSE. Younger people, I'm glad to see that the presidents, upcoming presidents of NAPSE are young, upcoming educators that's now getting started. So that is a high, is the fact of the matter of starting. I know appointments that we were able to make while I was president and along the way. And so I think we're gearing this shift to, because the founders of NAPSE have gotten older and now it's a new generation coming along. And so I'm glad to see us nurture this new generation of educators to move forward. So that's the high of it, but I would still like to see more and really move in that direction of involving younger educators into NAPSE.
Tabse excelled as an affiliate of the National Alliance of Black School Educators. Since 1993, 5 of the 9 presidents of the National Alliance of Black School Educators have been Texans. They have been active parts of Tabse, beginning with Dr. Al Roberts in 1993, Dr. Joe Drayton, Dr. Lois Harrison Jones, Dr. Andre Hornsby, and Dr. Carol Thomas.
We encourage many more young people, mentoring programs, to go on to get their doctorates so that they could be in leadership roles, so that we could really have a voice in the educational changes that were coming up. But I want to say also is that we had some really strong shoulders that we were standing on. So the Tabse presidents actually went on to become the NAPSE presidents, and actually Dr. Cummings, although he was not NAPSE president, he was a power broker, along with our emeritus founder and president of the Houston Area Alliance, our dear friend Mr. Ed Klein, who's no longer with us. But he was a power broker. He was either going to make a president or break a president. Texas had that kind of power because we worked so well together collaboratively. And whenever we went somewhere, we knew that we had it going on because we really had some depth as far as that. We trained a lot of administrators, a lot of future college presidents, a lot of superintendents. Our Superintendent's Academy was by far the best that Dr. Thomas Randall, Dr. Carol Thomas put together. So now you're going to see many more African Americans as we see today. And that is a result of the hard work and the leadership that came about.
Well, the low points were basically, back to my initial statement about we would get so far down the road with an initiative, and maybe there'd be a change in the leadership, and sometimes a new person would come in, and they didn't have the wherewithal to engender the same kind of dedication, and so an initiative might drop off of the table, and later on somebody might have to try to come back and restart it. But it was a sense that we didn't have full participation of African Americans who were in the educational arena when we started. It took us a long time to grow it to the point where we became very effective in terms of determining not only the state direction, and we had 18 affiliates in the state at that time, and we were able to influence the direction that the National Alliance of Black School Educators went in, because we had enough sense to collect ourselves as a state group and to talk about state concerns rather than individual concerns, which became very attractive to the National Alliance when they started to expand.
I don't think that we ever really fully got the full participation. We didn't have representation from all school groups. But again, we're touching a tender subject. It's taking a risk. I mean, it's taking a personal risk if you're going to get out and advocate for a group, because most of us at the time were working for either school district or college or university, so you had to protect your position and your job so you could get paid, and sometimes the voice and the message that you had to carry was detrimental.
The low point probably has been when we lost some of our founders. We've lost 2 or 3 of our founders, which has really been crushing for those of us who have been together for all these years. That to me is probably the low point of this organization.
Where do I see Tabse going in the future? I think we need to continue on the path that we're on. We need to reach out to other affiliates across the state and keep them involved. We need to see that there are more members coming on board and that they are involved. We need to keep our students involved in the activities.
One of the things that I know that Tabse is doing right now is working on aspiring leadership. And if they continue that focus, I actually think we're going to see more young African-American superintendents and central office staff, because they're getting the type of training now ahead of time as opposed to kind of learning on the job. And I had an opportunity to participate in one of the Aspiring Superintendents Academies, and I was impressed. I really and truly said, hey, this is what this organization is all about. So if the organization stays focused on what they're doing now, there's no doubt in my mind that Tabse is going to be a player in the state of Texas. And they will, legislators as well as the leadership, commissioners, or any of those folks associated with public ed, they will turn to an organization that is already establishing itself as a leader.
Well, I think what's important for Tabse is you have to have a vision. You have to renew the vision every so often. When I began in Tabse, it was 1987. We had a vision then that Texas would take a leadership role in the organization. My first experience in leadership was as a member of the foundation board. I eventually became treasurer, then chair of the foundation, prior to becoming president of NAPSE. We made sure that we had people represented in the various commissions. We grew our membership. We grew our affiliates here in Texas. You have to continue to do that. You have to be vigilant about it, but you also have to be politically astute. While membership is important, you cannot pay attention to what's happening in the political arena, because those things affect you directly. We built a strong relationship with the legislators here in Texas. We had a good relationship with the Department of Education. I hope that Tabse is continuing to build upon that. It's crucial to our survival. It's so relevant today, the same strategies we had then.
I see Tabse doing bigger and better things because, like I said, the incoming president has ideas that are going to set this organization ahead by leap years. It will be the first time in quite a while that we've had a superintendent at the helm. I think that it's going to be wonderful for the organization. And I just believe that he is going to train those people who come behind him. And it's all about the preparation that you give to those who follow you.
You know, it's definitely exciting that we're sitting here and where we are with Tabse as an organization, because I can remember about 25 years ago or so where you and I, we were sitting in the back of the room at one of the annual balls, annual banquets, and we were sitting at the back table. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And we were sitting there, and you had Dr. Drayton, and you had Dr. Thomas, and Dr. Page, and Dr. Ornsby, and others around, and I was just amazed. You know, I was country boy from East Texas. I had never been around that many professional PhD doctors that were leading the district, and that were African American, that were really standing on what's best for kids and what's best for our kids. And so Tabse was just powerful for me as a young educator, new into the profession, to be able to see Tabse, created for me this possibility, and to be able to see what's possible, and to be sitting here 25 or so years later, and now having the responsibility to carry that on is something that I appreciate, that I respect, cherish, and I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to us doing it together. How you feel about it?
My first Tabse conference, I was a new teacher, actually a school counselor, and my principal brought me, who later became a Tabse president, Althea Cartman, and sitting there, it was the first time at a conference I had seen so many African American educators that were professionals.
Right.
And I was like, what is this? And I remember feeling a little intimidated as I met so many people with fancy titles and big positions.
Yeah.
And I was in the room with them.
Right.
Little did I know later I'd be working with them.
Right.
And now, following behind you, will actually be the president of the organization.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity to work with former presidents and founders and executive directors, what it helped me understand was not only the practice, but the science and the research of why we do what we do.
Right.
How important it is for children of color. You didn't realize how far behind we were when teaching them, because we taught them for excellence. But as a whole, we weren't where we should have been.
Yeah.
And what a disservice to our students and to the teachers that teach them that aren't prepared.
Right. And so for us, Tabse was critical. For me, you made me think about some things, and so for me, I remember being in this room where I didn't know very many people, but I remember Mr. Washington coming to me and inviting me into a room. He didn't know me from Adam. I was just, a teacher, and he said, "Come on over and come on in the room." I remember Dr. Owens, but I remember these guys who were leaders, and they had time for just a young teacher starting off, and it was just powerful. And I think it's important that we recognize that we now have that responsibility, that the reality is the people who started this organization 29 years ago, they invested their time. And I think now we have that responsibility to invest our time to make sure that in 25 years that Tabse is still here. And I think that's critical. I think capturing the message like we've been able to capture it with this video is going to really help us to make sure that that if you're an educator in the state of Texas and you have the agenda of educating African American students as at the forefront, then you'll be a part of this organization. That's what I'd like to see in the future, that we all understand what Tabse is, that we work to keep Tabse sustainable, and it's sustainable because of what others are going to be willing to do.
And for educators, the other thing that Tabse did for me, getting a chance to work and appreciate and listen to the founders at all of the workshops and the banquets, is educators now have to realize what I didn't know until I came, was you can't do this by yourself. You have to be part of a larger network and a group with a tradition and a pattern that's committed to excellence.
Right.
Because those of us that are serving the public and the private school sector, those parents of color are trusting us to know what it is that we're doing with their children and to do what's necessary to educate and prepare ourselves to push them all the way through. That's what some of the founders and my mentors, many of who have been on the video, from Elaine Bailey, Thomas Randall, Althea Cartman, Carol Thomas, watching them and not even videotape. We were there when Rod Page would address, who became, so a lot of what we do, we never did in isolation.
Right.
We always did it together as a network. We did it as a state, and we contributed to the national.
Right.
And I think that's part of what we are charged to do, is to carry on what was passed to us.
Right.
And to continue to give that back. And as long as we have children of color in Texas schools, we need to have a Tabse to prepare leaders to reach them.
Yeah.
As an incoming president for the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators, I want to thank, first of all, Dr. Michael McFarland for having the vision to put this video together, including founders, national presidents, executive directors, and state presidents. I also want to thank the student affiliate here at Texas Southern University that helped organize all of the interviews, all of the editing, and all of the footage. With that, I'd also like to encourage other universities and colleges to also organize student affiliates, to become part of the network and become professionals that are networked into an organization with a history and a future. And lastly, I want to encourage all of you to continue to support the Texas Alliance of Black School Educators. Encourage others to join. Our theme for this conference is Closing the Achievement Gap, unlocking the doors to opportunity and access for all of us to understand education is a civil right. All of our students have a right to a proper education for social, economic mobility and access. I'm Kimberly McLeod. Thank you.
Thank you.